They came at dusk, which should have told me something. Every survey briefing I'd sat through, and I'd sat through 11 of them by then, 11 resettlement corridors across 4 sectors, most of them dirtier and hotter than the Death Con. Every one of them said the same thing about the Veth-Sorak continuance. They ran their extraction windows at dusk. Not because of the light, because of the acoustics. Sound carried differently in low-sun air over canyon rock, and the Veth-Sorak had been doing this long enough to know exactly which frequencies got swallowed and which ones didn't. I knew this because I'd read the survey logs. All of them. 11 corridors. Nobody had asked me to. I was a field surveyor, non-combatant designation, which in practice meant I carried a portable spectrograph. I catalogued mineral dispersion patterns in resettlement zones, and I wrote reports that 3 tiers of Veth-Sorak bureaucracy stamped and filed and never once acted on. I was not a signals analyst. I was not intelligence. I was the person who told you what the ground was made of. But I'd read the logs anyway because I had 12 hours of corridor transit and no one else in the resettlement group spoke much. And because somewhere around Survey Corridor 7, I'd started to notice a pattern the logs themselves never named. 51 resettlement groups across Veth-Sorak sector in 18 months. Gone. Not dispersed, not absorbed into local populations, not routed to secondary camps. Gone. The log said extraction event. They said Veth-Sorak asset recovery operation. They said a lot of things in very careful language that meant the same nothing. But the frequency logs were still attached. The signals logs were still there. Nobody had pulled them. I'd spent 3 corridors reading those. So when the low hum started, subsonic, bone felt rather than heard, the kind of thing that made the resettlement group around me go quiet in that particular way where they didn't know why they'd gone quiet, I already knew what it was. I'd seen that frequency before. Corridor 4, Corridor 7, Corridor 11. It was a Veth-Sorak extraction carrier running its dispersal tone at 14 hertz, below conscious hearing, designed to produce a specific response in most carbon-oxygen sapient nervous systems, calm, stillness. The particular docile compliance that in every survey log had been catalogued as population cooperative, no resistance documented. I looked at the group around me. 42 people, families mostly, 2 elderly couples who'd been resettling since before I was born. A man holding a child on his hip who'd been telling me for 3 days about the plot of land he'd been promised in the secondary corridor. They were going very quiet and very still. I looked up. The carrier was still beyond the canyon rim. I could see the underside heat shimmer where it displaced air, but it was close. 3 minutes, maybe 4. I sat down in the dust. Not because of the 14 hertz tone, because sitting down was the least conspicuous thing I could do with my hands, and I needed my hands to look like I wasn't doing anything with them. My field kit had a tight beam burst transmitter, regulation equipment for survey teams operating outside relay coverage, maximum range, 400 kilometers, designed to reach the nearest Veth-Sorak dispatch hub in an emergency. The nearest Veth-Sorak dispatch hub was 412 kilometers away. I sent anyway. Burst transmission, 12 characters, the corridor designation, the standard distress prefix, and 1 additional code I had no official authority to use and had memorized anyway, from the signals logs because it had appeared in the header of every pre-extraction frequency scan the Veth-Sorak had ever filed, and I had thought, 3 corridors ago, lying awake in a survey tent, I had thought, if I ever need someone to understand exactly what is happening here, and exactly how much time I don't have, this is the code I would use. It was a Veth-Sorak extraction frequency designation, their own signal header. I was telling whoever received it, you're reading their frequency. You already know what this is. Then I put the transmitter back in my kit, brushed dust off my knees, and waited. The carrier came over the canyon rim 2 minutes and 40 seconds later. It was large. I'd known it would be. The frequency dispersion pattern in Corridor 7 had suggested a Class 3 extraction hull, but there is a difference between knowing a thing from a log and watching it block out the last of the evening light above 42 people who have gone perfectly still and quiet and are not sure why. The Veth-Sorak were cephalopod-derived. They ran cold. Their extraction command used 3 officers per operation, and from the survey logs I knew exactly how an extraction operation ran. The carrier locked position, the dispersal tone cycled to a holding frequency, A single officer hailed the population group with a standard compliance address, and then the yield was processed. 51 groups, 18 months. Every log the same. The hail came down from a speaker array on the carrier's ventral surface. The officer's voice was flat and modulated. Continuance protocol, all business, no waste. Resettlement population, DEFCON survey corridor. You are within a declared Veth-Sorak asset recovery zone. Remain stationary. Compliance is noted and appreciated. The man with the child on his hip was 17 meters to my left. He hadn't moved. The child was looking at the carrier with enormous eyes and had not made a sound, which was the 14 hertz tone, working exactly as designed. I stood up. Not because I had a plan. I was a field surveyor. I had a spectrograph, a burst transmitter I'd already used, and 11 survey logs worth of pattern recognition. That was the complete inventory. I stood up because the compliance window in every extraction log ran approximately 4 minutes from first hail to processing initiation, and in approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds, whatever was going to happen, with or without me standing up, and I preferred to be standing. I looked at the carrier. I did not say anything. I had nothing to say that would matter to a Veth-Sorak extraction command at 400 meters distance. They didn't have a file on me. I was a non-combatant field surveyor. I wasn't in any threat index they ran. I was, from their operational perspective, yield. I watched the underside of the carrier. At 3 minutes and 12 seconds, the tight beam receiver on my kit chirped once. Not from the Veldara dispatch hub. The burst hadn't reached the hub. 412 kilometers. The signal had gone out and found something closer that I hadn't known was there. I looked at my receiver. The return code was a Veldara humanitarian fleet designation. Not dispatch, not relay. Fleet. They'd been running dark in the corridor approach for, I did the math in about 1 second, for long enough that they'd been there before the carrier came over the rim. They'd been waiting, watching the extraction window, documenting. They'd needed one thing to act. Confirmation of what they were looking at. I'd sent them the Veth-Sorak's own frequency header, their own extraction code. Translated out of continuance protocol, what I'd told them was, I know what this is. You know what this is. The clock is running. The carrier's dispersal tone cut out. That was the first sign. The 14 hertz hum stopped, and the canyon went so quiet I could hear the man with the child exhale 17 meters away. The second sign was the light on the carrier's ventral array, going from processing green to something I'd never seen in any log and didn't have a designation for. It stayed that color for approximately 4 seconds. The third sign was the carrier rotating, slowly, away from us. It didn't run. It was too large to run quickly, and too exposed to try. It just stopped being interested in the DEFCON survey corridor, and began, with what I can only describe as a very deliberate shift in priority, to be interested in something else, something behind it, something that had emerged from the canyon shadow on the western approach, and was now, according to the brief blurt of data my receiver gave me, reading as 6 Veldara humanitarian fleet assets in close formation. 6. For one extraction carrier. The man with the child was looking at me. His mouth was slightly open. The child was still quiet, but was now watching me instead of the carrier. I picked up my spectrograph and checked the mineral dispersion reading. The DEFCON canyon substrate was primarily silicate compression with iron oxide banding at irregular depth intervals, consistent with the secondary corridor resettlement assessments, suitable for foundational construction in low humidity conditions. I wrote that down. The carrier was still moving when I finished the note. The fleet had not fired. Nobody had fired. There was no sound from above except the displacement of air from things that were very large, and moving with great patience and complete certainty. The man with the child found his voice eventually. "What just happened?" he said. "Survey corridors clear," I said. "We can move." I didn't explain the rest. I didn't have to. In 6 hours, there would be a Veldara incident report with my burst transmission logged as Exhibit 1, and in that report would be the notation. I know this because I've read enough of those reports to know exactly how the notation reads, that the population group had not resisted, had not escalated, had not required any action beyond the initial alert, that the yield had simply declined to be yield, and that it had known the frequency.